Bam.
Hello, this is Mitch Ferguson, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
Yes. I love getting a chance to talk with all these folks that have all these different points of view about these complex things. I used on purpose for the episode a foreign policy Euler diagram of Europe. And it's like, and anybody that doesn't know what I'll pull it up so you guys can see what an Euler diagram looks like. But these are great diagrams for showing complex things, and they're hard to make because the relationships between it's like a Venn diagram, but with 100 different variables, 100 Venn. So a Venn is like a zoomed in version of an Euler. Let me put this up here. So you're just trying to describe Europe here, right? And I can't even fit the whole thing in the window. That's what I loved about this image. And so when we talk about foreign policy, there's a lot going on, and most of the time, we see it represented as security or something else, but the economics of these things. I don't mean necessarily economic policy internally, but like just the economics of it, that rarely ever gets discussed. And so when you have folks planning these things, and I don't know how many economists are in the room when the president's like yes knowing on a big decision, but you do need to think ahead a little bit. And we saw an example of that this week where Lloyd's of London and the other shipping insurers dropped out for whatever reason. You can pick your path on that. But then the U.S. Donald Trump said, "Hey, we'll insure you. Matter of fact, we'll insure you and ensure your passage through naval might." So I think that's a good jumping off point. When you see stuff like that, is there an economist involved in this? How senior is that economist? And then how accurate are those guys? Like, in the military, it's like, hey, fuck up, move up, right? So I don't know if that works that way in the federal economics world, but help us out, help us understand all of that stuff, if you don't mind. Oh, no, I can't hear you. Why can't I hear you? Is my thing working? Okay, my thing. I think your mic maybe isn't on. Maybe. All right, we're gonna work this out. Everybody. I still don't hear you.
All right. How about?
I think talk some more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Can you?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's fine.
No, this is a great topic. My experience as a State Department economics officer was interesting. We in the State Department, very big place, we had economists embedded throughout all the different regional bureaus, and we had a Bureau of Economic Affairs with its own undersecretary. So at least from the State Department standpoint, economists were involved in at least understanding or explaining all the different economic implications that a broad policy objective might encounter when it came up against reality. We also managed, together with Commerce and some others, the sanctions programs. So a lot of times when you see what's going on in places like Iran or Venezuela, they're up against Russia, they're up against some really crippling sanctions, and the nuts and bolts behind that only get moved and released or tightened with those type of economic people contributing to the thing. So when you look at, for example, I don't know if you saw the news yesterday where Doug Burgum was in Venezuela with Delcy Rodriguez, and they had achieved an agreement to move 1,000 kilograms of Venezuelan gold to the U.S. So one might wonder what the heck, and why. But if you think of the sanctions programs, they couldn't move that gold because there were sanctions on the country prohibiting its sale on the open market. So who would buy it if you had it all? You had all this gold. Russia, China, people evading sanctions would buy it on the black market, and off it would go. So then you have the U.S. come in and do what it did with Maduro. That no longer is an option. That black market transaction paradigm no longer works quite like it did. And so now what are you going to do? You need the foreign reserves. You need to get rid of your gold because you need your gold miners employed. You need all the kickbacks still to the people in the machinery that made all the money on the gold. You got to do something with the gold or the oil or the uranium or whatever it is. And so that's what we saw yesterday, a little peek under the skirt about what happens when you change one of these axis of evil type regimes that lived and thrived under a sanctions regime with the shadow fleets, with all this other stuff. So to answer your question, yeah, there's economists throughout this whole thing. And we also work with private sector economists because everyone has their contacts. In a lot of your shows, you talk about where you find those contacts, even at the highest levels of government and things that are not necessarily economics related. You know, they're talking to the Moody's people. They're talking to the even the Soros folks. Everyone that moves money in this economy has an opinion about what would happen if you press that button or pulled that lever.
Then you bring in like the adjacent things, right? There's so many of these things. John Conrad, for example, on X is a fantastic account to follow if you want to understand the merchant marine aspect. A very narrow strip, right? But if you don't build capacity there, and if you don't develop professionals through that pathway, if you don't invest in that system, you let a lot of rot get into the merchant naval system. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, that's bad, isn't it?
It doesn't
And then
work.
still, because John Conrad, like he's like, hey, I like Donald Trump. We dismiss this very important person in terms of the professional aspects of Navy, partly because of politics, but also because, well, who cares about merchant marines? What even are those things? And I was talking yesterday on the show. There's a university that's largely invisible to the entire nation called Cal. It's Cal Poly now, but Cal State Maritime. It's in the Bay Area, and they graduate people that do things like going to the Merchant Marines. It's a service academy, everybody, right? So 5,000 or so people go to the Naval Academy, 5,000 or so go to the Army Academy, 5,000 or so go to the Air Force. Okay, Cal State Maritime, 1,000. That's it. And if they don't all go into merchant, I'm sure there are not enough slots to fill the need. I mean, 1,000 people are going to retire every year out of the merchant marine system, so economics, sailing, and insurance, all these things work. And you all are trying to figure out how to stay ahead of problems, how to fix problems. It's an amazing discipline that you guys do.
Well, if we want to, and probably not useful to think too much about the past, but you can see an example where it did not work despite all the greatest intentions. And it's something you're very, very familiar with, which is Iraq, Afghanistan.
Yeah.
We came in, and even President Trump talked about this in the context of Iran. The de-Baathification of the entire country sounds great. Those guys, I'm sure, were bad eggs, but you've now removed not just a layer, you've removed everybody that takes the garbage out, everybody that is the police, everybody that circulates money, everybody that does everything is suddenly gone. And you're going to try as a government and put in friendly people, and do they know how to run a power plant? Do they know how to control air traffic? Who knows? It didn't work very well. And then, as I mentioned before, you had these governments in these places don't work like ours, and some parts of our government work this way as well. So much is under the table. It's all about who you know, how well you grease the skids, all the different things that village kicks back up to the county councils, all that sort of thing. And if you come in and just straight up nuke that, or whatever you do to it, then what? And then everyone runs around. It's like the ants that all of a sudden their ant holes, or they just kind of run around and do random things, or not.
Yeah. Or not. So the finance, the economics aspects of something like, hey, we're going to go topple the Iranian government. They're controlling the Straits of Hormuz. How many economists does it take to dig in on that problem? Is that like working groups? And then there must be classified like TS granted economists so they can get into these planning meetings, because for sure that's all classified, that stuff's being set up. And then, yeah, you're in a working group saying, well, Mitch, what about the economics things? Like, you can't do it. Because you got these, and then they're like, oh, God damn it, how do we deal with this, right? I mean,
we were completely.
Yeah.
So I had above a top secret clearance, and I went to many meetings in the White House talking about it could be APEC, it could be Latin America. I even did a couple on Africa, and it's like, if we do this, what are the economic repercussions? That was what I was involved in, right? And it wasn't just me. I had to have a cleared, approved position by people below and above me that all signed off on it. State Department, there, 50 clearances, and once you got that, then you can go present your position. So, again, I was apolitical, so it didn't matter. I saw it from Clinton to Trump, the various administrations and how they dealt with it. Sometimes They pay a lot of attention to the economists. Sometimes Peter Navarro knows all the answers, and they don't, and hardly matters what anybody else says. It all depends on the style of leadership from the president on down to the National Security Council. They have economists as well. The whole thing, economists are almost overlaid. I wouldn't say 1-to-1, probably 1 to 5, the political types, and then the economists. But we're there, and we to be successful, you've got to be creative. Because one of the things I want to talk with you about is inertia in these international affairs, especially related to economics, is really important. You can have a terrible actor. You can have Venezuela. You can even have Iran. And as long as things are static, you can deal with that, right? You've got the insurance guys that can insure the ships through the Straits of Hormuz. You can absorb a missile or two, here and there. It's all in actuarial matrices that the insurance people has. When you decide to mess with that, you've thrown chaos or uncertainty into the mix, and that gets really expensive. And that's where the economist side of things comes in. It's hard to separate your politics, though. Sometimes I saw it so often. People would just say, you can't do that. I'm sorry, you can't do that. You can't, if you took out Iran, then they'd close the Straits of Hormuz. They'd attack all their navy. Over and over, there's all these things you can't do. But then you have an executive that says, we're going to do it, so you better figure out how to manage it. And then that's where quality rises to the top.
Yeah, and then I guess we should talk about this a little bit. And I see Jeff throwing out questions and comments. Thank you, Jeff. When at their worst, we'll just say economists are swamp creatures, right? Like you get into the system and you don't leave. You're part of the system, and you're trying to manage this. Surely there's internal conflict where you guys disagree. President Trump is fond of saying, "All these economists said all this stuff about the economy, and I proved them all wrong." Maybe not. I don't know. But you have all of this churn of differing opinions, and I imagine like the economists kind of lean left and right over the years, kind of just like the nation does, it kind of go back and forth.
For sure.
How does that internal political and capacity, because fuck up, move up, right? How does all that work in that circle? Since there's 1 to 5-ish ratio that we're playing with, look, half of those economists are below average, whatever that means, right? I mean, if they already come into the system being cream, okay, but
at a certain level, you get when you're playing in this game across. I think across agencies, even my least favorite agencies, I'd still say that the people that I dealt with were pretty quality folks. Amongst them, yes, you absolutely differentiate on quality. You know what being a bureaucratic economist means? It blunts the tip of the spear. I can have my ideas, which I've formed for a really long period of time, empirically, sharpened, all that stuff, sharpen the saw, that sort of thing. When you go into an interagency deal and you start, I'm going to use the terrible metaphor, I'm sorry, but if you start whacking with your spear, that's not going to get you very far. And you're going to get, I used to call it the sandbox theory of diplomacy. If you go to someone's sandbox, you've been invited, because of your title, you get invited to USTR, you'll get invited to the NSC, you'll get invited to Commerce, wherever you might get invited to. And if you play well in the sandbox, if you help build castles and little rivers and play with the trucks and everyone has fun, you're going to get invited back, even when the topic in the sandbox is not really related to yours. You've just been so helpful that they'll invite you back. I've seen other people that kick the castles down in the sandbox and throw all the sand out of the box, and it's just not very helpful. So to go back to my original metaphor, which is sharpening the saw, I find that to participate constructively in an interagency process as an economist in a topic which isn't 100% my bailiwick, I would have to be very clever and insert my views about different things, backed by my interagency clearances, not saying things I wasn't allowed to say, but not be 100%, intensity level on it. Try and work that diplomacy angle and get people to come at it from my angle. There was more diplomacy done as a diplomat in the U.S. interagency process than I ever did overseas.
Yeah, boy, we can study that and talk about that forever. But that complexity already is fascinating to me. So when we get ready to go topple Iran or Venezuela, and we know that there's been sanctions in place, someone in your world's going, make sure you grab the gold, get some corn of the market, whatever they're saying, and that kind of thing. What other kind of things are they coming up with? And what's the point of reference? I mean, these are all guesses. I've sat in these rooms with these kind of decisions going on, and everybody has their baby, right? And it's like, we got to make sure we grab the gold. We don't grab the gold, we don't have the gold, and that's going to be a mistake. So what does that look like, that negotiation amongst the babies, the sales process of, hey, pay attention to me, that kind of thing?
Distracted by a shiny object because it just affected me so much over many years. There are projects, and each Secretary of State has their own pet project. And for Secretary Clinton, it was global camp stoves. I don't know if you remember the Global Camp Stove Fuel Alliance, whatever the case was.
Yeah.
They wanted to stop chopping down the trees and use fuel. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
But oh my God, every single thing the Secretary signed off on had a talking point about camp stoves. And it would show up even after the interagency process was over. You'd get the talking points for the president's thing, and it's like, oh, I'm sorry, Mitch, your global banking system for immigrants, we can't talk about that because we had to include this thing about the camp stove. I'm like, you got to be shitting me. There it is again. So some people are very, very effective at very high levels of doing that sort of thing. The folks with the gold, there are people, especially not State Department so much, but other places where their whole job was to focus on that country's gold for their whole career. It's like those dudes in Midnight Hammer that, like, that building was theirs. They knew all the ventilation shafts. They knew where everything had to go and what it would look like after it was destroyed. There's people like that in certain agencies and other places that know that about gold. And you hope to hear from. I never heard from those guys so much because they would interject in different places than the discussion I was having ran out. But if we paid attention enough as State Department, and most of my colleagues and I, we tried to do that, we would game that out properly. But we'd be surprised. I mean, the whole thing is we can be really, really clever, but holy cow, they had copper. You know, we didn't know they had a smelter. And so sometimes you get surprised by information that you didn't have time to drill down. You can know it all if you have time, right? If you have time and resources, you can know everything, but you don't have the resources, so you only know some things, and you try and focus on the important ones. And if you're right most of the time, that quality is valued. And there's your that's where people realize where quality is.
The other thing I guess to say is we're talking about active actions. We're going to go topple Venezuela. We're going to go topple Iran, and we're not making any we're just talking about these are situations. And then there's all the babies that die. And you're like, we don't go topple Taiwan. We don't go topple Mexico. We don't go. So like all these, and I'm not saying we're trying to do these things, everybody. I'm just giving examples. There's all these operations that are proposed, and it's like, no. Yes. So all the no ones require effort too. Whatever those things are. In this case, we're using toppling, nations, but there's a lot of big moving parts that someone has to say yes to. And then there's all the other ones that get work grouped into nothingness. And even in the military decision-making process, 3 distinct outcomes, 3 distinct plans. So it's like, hey, Pete and Mitch do a show, Pete and Mitch don't do a show, and then Pete and Mitch go to a show. 3 distinct things. And then the boss is like, send Pete and Mitch to a show. And then that's when all the effort gets pushed on that thing. And there's a lot of broken hearts for a moment, but then everybody's like, we all have to go in this direction. That's it. So I'm trying to take a very complex thing and put it in there. But there's all of that effort that goes into if this, then this. Everybody go figure out what the ifs are and then figure out what the thens are. And then we'll decide what we want to do.
Those were my favorite memos to write. I remember them very well. In fact, I can see them as you describe them. And it's an introduction, facts, and then you flip the page and it's like, and you put the yes or no lines that are waiting for the signature and the X. It's grand, and those would make me happy, even if they didn't choose the one that I thought was the best. And you can put your finger on the scale. You remember, all this. You can put your finger on the scale a little bit by, but by the order. You can put the orders. Got to know your boss. It's quite interesting. Yeah, for those days, good old days.
Oh man, it's so funny. Yeah, like the smallest thing, like if the boss hates blue in text on a slide, and you slide it in there, and the one you don't like, what the fuck is that? Distracted, whatever. But and also we all if we're smart, we seed in the questions we want them to ask as opposed to the rangy like, hey, how about this? And you're like, I did not expect that question. You leave a little gap in the information so they ask the obvious question. So there's a lot of salesmanship in these things.
So, one of the things State Department does nauseum are cables, and that's another fun thing to do. And it was one of my favorite things to do was write from the embassies. We'd write these cables, and you'd go to these meetings. You'd observe things. I'm sure they're like intelligence reports, but they're probably a lot more words involved. I began my journey to being very good at that when I realized, and someone told me, I don't remember who it is, I'm very sorry, but they were very smart. you should know exactly who you're writing for, like individually, when you write your cable. And imagine that person with the cable in their hand, reading your words, forming the questions in their minds that you are now answering at the end. So that there were, toward the end of my career, I was doing exactly that. We had a natural disaster, just an example off the top of my mind, in a country, Central America, I was working for, and bridges were destroyed. All kinds of stuff was happening. I had, from a prior conversation we had with our Department of Agriculture, the secretary level, and some Central Americans, I was able to write a cable exactly to the person that I had met there, explaining what the country needed, where the funds would be located, and what to do to move it forward. And I back channeled that through my State Department. Those guys got it. They never get cables at the Department of Agriculture from embassies, and so it was like a big deal to them. And they read it and gave it to the secretary, who wrote on top of it in a note, "Take care of this for us." And off a $50 million program started to help repair bridges from disaster. It was really one of the coolest things I did. Which I guess is a statement in of itself, but that's how the system works, and that's how it works with these toppling or not toppling things, except on a much bigger, more focused scale, if I can use those two things.
I want to break out of this part of where we're at, but I just want to see if there's another parallel here. I'll write an intel report. It's very granular. We went on this patrol. I talked to these people. I saw these things. Here's what I think. And you write that, and you just publish that into the void. So yes, I'm trying to communicate to somebody, and I'm trying to communicate high and wide at the same time. Very hard to do. And then you never hear like, "Hey, Pete, that report was great. We did love more." You never get that. And so you're just like, I don't know. I just wrote about what I did today, and it means nothing. It's just nothing. And then one day someone's like, "Hey, why don't you come up to Kabul and give us a briefing?" And you're like, "What? You read my report?"
And then when they have your cable, I haven't seen a secretary. I've seen deputy secretaries with my cable in their hands when you go into those meetings. And what did you mean by that? Mm-hmm. And you damn well better know what you meant by that and be able to describe it in a better way. So it's heady stuff, and it's good. You got to be right, though. If you're wrong, people above you don't like to be made fools of or be ridiculed, not that, by their superiors. And if you gave bad advice, or if you gave incomplete advice, I've done that too, and younger levels of my career, and it was a rough go for a bit, and then you get better. But it happens.
Yeah, for sure. The when you are asked the question, "Ferguson, tell me this," the young person goes, "Let me triangulate and protect," and that is not what they want to hear. They want the answer to the question, and you can say, "This is the best we've got right now," or whatever those words are that your boss is comfortable with, because they are also signing that check too. And then you say what you have to say, but you have to give some kind of an answer. If you don't, you won't get invited back to many of those meetings. You have to have some kind of opinion for where you're at.
And it's an elevator pitch, maybe halfway up, right? I mean, and the finger. What are we supposed to say? What's this guy gonna? How are they gonna respond? Why will? And you know what, Pete? It's confidence too. Answer it because there were so many things. It's like, I guess, but older me is like, no, because that's what they're going to do. Trust me. And which is
okay. So let's get back to the current event stuff. We have the shipping insurance thing, and there's a lot to be said about that. And I don't know that much about it specifically to get too deep into the weeds, but when something like that happens, when an entire industry is lights out, whether they wanted to be lights out or the lights were turned out, and is that us doing that to London to cause England to make, who knows, right? So if you have any thoughts there, but also the boss raising his hand and saying, "We'll protect all these shipping things." Are they about to eliminate that part of the Lloyd's and all the reinsurers' business forever? Did that just happen?
Well, we did this protect the shipping things back in the 80s. What was that operation called? I forget. We did it. They changed all the Panamanian flags to American flags, and we escorted them along. That's around the time the Vincennes crisis happened, if you recall that, which is something I'm really worried about happening again. But that's what happens when you put those ships in that area. It's bad things. Anyway, but we'll get there eventually. And I think because it's not happening yet. And that part of the thing is probably going to happen when we're sure that the as many of the short range and medium range missiles and whatnot are out of the way, because that was not the case back in the 80s. Back in the 80s, Iran was fully armed and capable and lighting us up on radar and all that other stuff. Okay, so to the insurance stuff, we have to think about what the situation looks like to those of us that are outside and don't know. It looks like, wow, there's no eastbound ships through the Straits of Hormuz. They're not going. The Straits of Hormuz are closed. Was it because of Iranian subs or patrol boats or destroyers? No, it was because the Lloyd's of London and other insurers are like, no way, they're going to get sank. We're not going to insure that. So when shipping stops like that, it's like you're constipated. You've got all the oil. Oil has to flow. It's got to go. And if you don't pump it, you got a problem. And things back up, and the fields don't work, and your ships are out of whack. It's really disruptive. So the oil's got to go. If the insurers aren't making the oil go, we had the same thing happen after 9/11. There are only one or two companies that insure airplanes, very expensive things. And with terrorism all over the place, they're like, sorry, we're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to. And so the U.S. government backstopped the people that insure airplanes and either gave them a sovereign guarantee that they would get back a huge amount of what they potentially would lose, or would pay their premium on terrorism stuff, right? So you have normal plane or ship issues which happen, and then when there's uncertainty or chaos or war, bam, there's a certain premium. It's like a bad driver premium. You have to pay it for a few years. And so our government would step in and pay that part of the table, which is probably something they're probably doing now with negotiating with Lloyd's. And you don't want to nuke Lloyd's. You can't. And that's certainly, I bet, been discussed with UK, right? It's like, wow, nice Lloyd's you got here. Hate to see something happen to it, and so because we can do the whole thing, we can insure the ship and just float, tell them we'll pay for any damages, or we can use Lloyd's and pay their terror premium, and everything will be fine. So there's a couple different ways of doing things, and which is good. Economists work with politicians to know what those levers are, and they're not always, to you and me, easy to see.
Right. How often are those decisions we're picking the least bad option, also to just kind of maintain status quo, or whatever it is? Because the boss doesn't usually get easy decisions. It's always like, I'm glad this is off my desk. There you go, man.
You know what? It shows how vindictive we can be, and I don't mean we. I mean, maybe I do. That how vindictive we can be as a government. We hold the big stick. It reminds me of a conversation we had back during the Iraq War thing. After we'd done what we did and we're restoring it, something as simple as the production of this country's currency was a huge deal, because the economic stuff is very complicated, but it only costs you 35 cents to make a dollar bill. So somebody in a way earns that extra money, and that's a big deal. You hold it in reserve, et cetera, et cetera. South Africa has wonderful currency notes. They're the ones that made notes for all those countries in the Middle East, including Iraq. Well, they weren't very helpful. They weren't part of the coalition of the willing. And when they came calling to make the currency, the new currency that didn't have Saddam's face on it, they weren't selected. And they weren't selected because we were pissed off at them, and to hell with them. So the amount of vindictiveness can be wielded at levels which, I mean, that sounds really petty, but it was a big deal to the South African guys. And just like Lloyd's of London is a big deal to the British government, and their decision not to allow us to use Diego Garcia absolutely affects how we view what should happen with Lloyd's as the ensuring concern for the rest of the fleet.
Yeah. And that same thing happened. Go ahead.
I was going to say, but it depends on your executives and how, because a lot of times, like, well, we can't piss them off, so we can't do that. We need them later. We'll need the allies later. Yeah, well, you need the allies to do a certain thing later. That's where your executive differs greatly, right? And so if you've got a collaborative, person that's investing in future relationships, the vindictiveness happens a lot less. And however, if you're someone that sees things, like our current president, I believe, is one of these, sees things in a much more transactional way, then there's a cost to everything. And too bad for you guys.
Right. And when he says, "Hey, I need you to change your ways, or it's going to get worse for you,"
Or what they would say,
yeah,
or what they would say that, or what's going to happen, and we'd
yeah,
go, nothing's going to happen because the IMF isn't going to let us, or the WTO
right,
is, we got to follow the rules, or we got to, NAFTA says we can't do that. I want out of NAFTA. We're no longer doing this. We won't put any judges on the WTO trade court. Things, all the mechanisms that kept the train running on
hmm
the track have been torn away. If you ask people that are used to the way things worked before, and now, my gosh, now what? No one knows what to
yeah,
expect. Well, they're learning.
yeah, 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 yeah. And is that kind of pruning? Is that a? I suppose it could be good or bad. Is when someone comes in who's a reform president, and they come in and they start pruning. Uh, Everything costs something, right? Even if it's right to get Venezuela going in the right direction, even if it's right to get Iran going in the right direction, there's a lot of levers being pulled, and you can't account for all of them. There's a whole lot of if thens that there's no papers written on.
Oh boy. And again, you've got the folks that, at levels that are below the executive level. You've got the people that are working in the name of the president, and
Yeah,
they go all over the place, and you'll find them everywhere. And some of them actually are doing what they should be doing, and others aren't. And then there's the gray area and the intelligence side where that I've seen that just run rampant, where what very well could have been the president's wishes is what I'm doing, and okay, it it causes a conundrum for our allies and even our enemies. It's like, well, and we've talked about this before, Pete. Is this going to stick? Is the U.S. always going to be like that, or are we going to put the guardrails back on afterwards, or is this the new normal? And how long will it be normal for? Unknown, right? I mean,
right. Yeah,
these are hard decisions that have been made. We've been at a stalemate in Iran ever since the 70s, right? And then we, for whatever reason, we probably couldn't attack them back in the day. We were too focused on a different sort of war fighting thing. And
yeah,
then afterwards, it just became too expensive in terms of blood and treasure and different friendships, allies, different equities, and that's right, different equities. But now, Venezuela's gone, government's Maduro's gone, Iran is having trouble. This the whole chessboard's been upended.
yeah, yeah.
It's back to that
Cuba
thing,
is
expectations.
Cuba is wobbling. Other countries are looking around, going, "Are we next?" And so, I guess you're hoping, if you're the president of the United States, that other countries start to behave in a way that's more in line with the direction they want to go, and doing that. But again, you got to work to earn that too. How much quality can the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, put into each one of these many different things that he has to do? At some point, he reaches max capacity, and failure is just an inevitable outcome, because you can't hammer away at the wall like this too many times without smashing something you didn't want to smash. Like that
That's a
just
great
has to happen.
way of describing it. But that's one of the things that I've been surprised by and fascinated by and just riveted on an almost daily basis is they are wielding a very big hammer. And when you do that normally, you cause great destruction. Sometimes when you wield a big hammer like that, if you do it consistently enough and in the right places, that big ugly wall that should never have been there falls down.
Yeah.
And then your house is open and you shore some things up and you can have that new kitchen island. And after a while, people don't even remember that you had the construction people in. That's what I'm hoping is happening now. And there are a lot of people in our country, and there are a lot of foreign, I'd call them adversaries, that's a poor word, and for their own reasons, they want to put sand in the gears and not make this as easy for the president and his political team, just because of pure politics, right?
hmm
And it's not because they're un-American. It's not because they want us as a country to fail. And here I'm talking about Democrats, generally writ large. It's because our U.S. government is so much more than just foreign policy. It's so many different things. It's domestic policy, all these things, and the president's power and inertia, can be propelled by these certain things. Look at what happened. I mean, Minnesota and all the terrible things that happened with our own people protesting our own government. It feels like 2 years ago, but it was just a few weeks back. But now we've got a whole different sort of inertia. So people are trying to fight against that and bring a focus back to if it's incompetence or uncaring, all these different things that politicians do. There's entire shows that we talked about there, but that's what that looks like, and it's not unpatriotic, although it can feel like it and look like it, just because that's what the people with the inertia want it to be viewed as.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, Donald Trump doesn't govern in a way that people should feel comfortable, right? Like whether you like him or not, he's making a lot of bets. He's placing a lot of bets on the table. And even if they're smart bets, again, not every bet is going to pay off,
That helicopter pilot that was at the State of the Union,
Yeah.
his big bet on Venezuela, that's the dude that held the breach, right? If it weren't for that guy and his shot up legs ability to spin a dual rotor helicopter
That's
so
a
the
great
door
point.
can point at the guys that were shooting him, the SEAL team
Yeah.
or the Delta forces. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
dudes like that, and we've got thousands of them. Thousands of them.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to do fine. But
Yeah.
it's hard. It's a struggle, and it shouldn't be easy.
Yeah. It shouldn't be easy. What's your confidence level in terms of on the economic side of what they're doing? Is this making sense? Like I would submit that a stable, even sub-stable, but not like homicidal Iran is infinitely more efficient than this thing where we pour money in and chaos comes out. And it's not a critique of any policy, but we weren't able to get good outcomes coming out of there. And so the entire region was destabilized by one country, which caused the secondary and tertiary things of more conflict coming and more side choosing and sub pockets. So there's a lot that happens when Iran is funding, and a lot of it indirectly from us funding all this chaos. So is the juice worth the squeeze just to get them back to just below average as opposed to being one of the worst rogue nations on the earth right now?
That's quite a question. Iran has punched way above its weight forever in my lifetime because of its ability to spend with its oil revenue, despite being sanctioned to the hilt all over the place. Right. That something else we should talk about is this the shadow fleet, the shadow movement of giant sums of money and resources evading sanctions, being sent to Russia and to China, places that don't really care about the Western world's views of who's good and who's bad and who should be sanctioned and who shouldn't. On our checkbooks, people still use them. There's our ABA number and our SWIFT number. All those numbers go into the computers and route transactions. Same thing is true of economies and giant companies and millions and billions of dollars. When we put sanctions on a country, we go to the SWIFT system and we stop it for those banks in those countries. Oh, says Iran or Venezuela, that's too bad. We have all this gold and all this oil. I guess we're just not going to be able to sell it.
Yeah.
They sell it to China and to Russia. Do they sell it at market prices? No, they do not. They probably sell it well below 50% market prices. I don't know. I never bought contraband. But those guys are saying, hey, yeah, we'll buy your oil you shouldn't be able to be selling, and we'll do it quietly. We haven't talked about BRICS yet. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. It was that group of countries set up to try and create a counterbalance to the Bretton Woods Western system, IMF, and all that other stuff. One of the things they have is something called BRICS Pay, which is a way to not use the SWIFT system and do balance of payments transactions on a big scale amongst BRICS members. It sounds really nice and that's great, but what it does is it evades sanctions because you can use these transfers. Anyway, so removing Iran from that whole scenario is one of the biggest benefits, in my view, of removing Iraq from wherever it was because you had the Shiite side of, along with the Shia side, of funding the Palestinian militants and folks around the world doing what they did terroristically because of freeing Palestine.
Yeah.
Once you got that sort of offline in the way you described what we hope to do with Iran, it became a lot easier and a lot of the energy was gone. You still have, if you can remove Iran from that equation, and thank God we have a kingdom of Saudi Arabia who seems to act moderately, although they have a lot of issues and a lot of pressures and so on and so forth. If you remove the Iraq and the Iran money from the radical Islamic Salafat, that sort of thing, you've taken away, you've defanged the whole monster. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I'm quite optimistic, although there's going to be organizations that step into the vacuum that try and occupy the space. They just won't be as good or as rich or committed as the Ayatollahs are.
When we do things like this with Iran, with Venezuela, with the Panama Canal, early, that also seems like 10 years ago when Rubio went down. Is like, get China out. These take cards out of the pile and they put them in the president's hands, and he's like, all right, Russia, now that you have even less cards, even less control, even less reach, I've locked down these levers, because Russia for sure, China for sure, all these countries have these levers, the ability to freely flow nefarious actors into the US, and saying that's stopped as well, right? There's so much of this stuff that is really, even if you don't like Donald Trump, and I'm no fan there, but these are things that make sense to me, in terms of
it's
grand
bold.
strategy.
It's bold. I mean, and it's going to work or it's not going to work.
Yeah.
What does success look like? What do we look like 10 years from now? I think that you look at all these little missiles and all these little drones, and each one is terrible for the family that gets blown up by them, and they were a definite deterrent for many, many years. Mm-hmm. But to ignore that as a deterrent and make a deal to, or go get Maduro, however that happened, to go in there and do what we're doing with Iran, if we can move past this whole concept of taking hostages from civilians, away from the equation, that's good, but it's bad because it means war is going to be a lot more kinetic, lethal, and impactful if people decided. For example, I mean, how can we do what we're doing in Iran while Russia continues to still trade, jabs with Ukraine?
Right.
Holy cow. How is Zelensky globetrotting anywhere? Couldn't they drop it? I mean, we're giving a green light in a way to a different sort of warfare for people that we may not like when they use it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. When you can democratize war and make a war robot for basically no money compared to like any kind of any plane, yeah, anybody can make war, even if it's small scale. It's going to be massive to the people that are impacted by it. And yeah, I don't know what we do about that. I mean, civilian snipers can reliably shoot 2 miles and take something out with off-the-shelf software and optics, and a Remington. I mean, it's not complicated stuff. It causes a lot of chaos.
We hadn't seen political assassination attempts since the 60s, probably. Or I guess there was some stuff in the 70s with Ford and all that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't. It's it's tough. And then again, I'm sorry, that's getting away from the economics of it. But
yeah,
I'm optimistic about the economics going forward with a responsible Iran, not selling its oil on the black market, selling it above board. It'll create more supply, tremendous amounts of supply in the system for the rest of us, whereas before it was just siphoned off and sent to China for under market value. China's the one that's suffering, right? Because how much oil did they get from Venezuela and Iran? A lot. I think I don't remember the number. We won't know because it's all contraband. They're gonna, they had the announcement that they're not allowing their refiners to ship out gasoline or diesel. Why would they ship out gasoline or diesel anyway? The economics of oil, like you saw it in Benicia, right? You can create a whole bunch of gas and diesel and send it out at certain times for when one or another refinery someplace else is offline or needs the thing. But if you're worried about long-term supply disruptions, then you start hoarding your own production, which is maybe what China is doing. I don't really take these public announcements, at face value, but
Sure.
if that starts happening.
Yeah, and again, we'll have to give this current administration the benefit of the doubt because it's their show. But if you have a more efficient energy system like the U.S. is trying to put in, I mean, the best, safest way to move any kind of oil is via pipeline, and then rail, and then on trucks, and then on ships. Ships is terrible. It's a terrible way to move oil, but and sometimes you have to because it's the best way when there's no other good option. But our economic or our energy policy has been so backwards. We are so inefficient. Getting rid of the Benicia refinery, among others, that's a very modern, very safe, very clean, very high paid place. And there's no better place in the Bay Area to make stuff than right there. And I don't know if you know this, but Valero makes the predominant amount of asphalt for Northern California. And I don't just mean the Bay Area, like the whole northern part of it. And so when you don't have that, that has to still be made, has to come from somewhere. And that means you have to have heating trucks because the stuff will set up and you got to move them. And we're struggling to move enough product through our existing pipelines. And so that all, and this isn't economics, but we'll get there, everybody. When that system is so badly broken in just one state, granted a big oil state, we have problems that we can't solve internally. Now, when you create this global impact on how we trade energy and where it moves and how we acquire it and how we pay for it, and we can't manage our own internal system, boy, oh boy, can you cause a lot of because energy, if you want to drive people crazy, have the power be intermittent like it was in Iraq. You know, getting Iraq to have stable power, it should be easy. It should be straightforward to get steady electricity anywhere in Iraq. Like we should be well past that point. And I still don't think that we have that as a norm there. And so all of this global governance is linked to energy, economics. All these things have to work in a way that makes sense. And we struggle to get it right internally primarily because of politics.
It was the energy brownouts that delivered a Republican governor for California for a couple terms. Yeah, it's going to be a problem. Going back to the sanctions thing and the SWIFT accounts. Now that Iran and Venezuela are offline, the people that would buy from them are more likely to have to use those SWIFT accounts that are sanctionable, right? So if you're Russia, and of course Russia has lots and lots of resources, but it gets to be like we were talking about the timing and the swaps and all this sort of stuff. They could just do that with these other kind of rogue countries. If you've got to expose yourself to the sanctions regimes now of the normal banking system, that's a problem for you. And I'm sure that's probably what's driving a lot of the China thing. One of the reasons one of the reasons China may not have cared that much about invading Taiwan is because they had the backstop of Venezuelan and Iranian crude oil unsanctionable through their BRICS. Now, if they do something untoward that results in global pariahship and the imposition of sanctions broadly against their country, it'll be very hard for them to bust those sanctions because the piggy bank's closed. And so it's going to actually make the world a better, more predictable, safer place because more of the world is going to have to be regulated by the good guys.
One of the other things that we do, and I learned this when I was doing some Ukraine work. That's all I really can say about that. But the way we route money, and again, you and I've talked about this, the velocity of money, the way it routes money. Like when you exchange that electronic dollar, everybody, it's gone. And if it travels through an American bank and a crime was committed based upon that dollar, guess what? That's how they get you. But it's true, right? So even if you have nothing to do with the U.S., but your money routes outside of your control through a Citibank in New York City, which is you've committed a crime without even doing anything. And it's not that they want to put you in jail; it's that they want to put the chains on you and lock you down, like bam. And so you're forced to move money at the old-fashioned pace, which is a duffel bag full at a time, or whatever it is.
A bag of diamonds or something.
Or exactly. Yeah.
I mean, that's and that all happens, but that can be interdicted too. I mean,
sure.
Stuff.
Yeah. I mean, You-
even if you go to a country, and this happens, I saw it a lot in Colombia, where you have the Clinton list, the OFAC list, the Office of Foreign Assets Control, where you can say, like, for example, Gustavo Petro, you're a narco trafficker, therefore you can no longer, you're debanked.
yeah.
Well, that's fine. I'll just use Bancolombia. Well, that's nice. Bancolombia has a constituent account at Citibank in New York. Every single thing they do every day is, and if someone who's on the OFAC list, right, wants to do business in their own bank,
Yeah.
and that bank does business with Citibank, that's how they get you. The whole bank can be debanked, so they
Yeah.
comply
Yeah.
with the list. It's a problem.
It is.
And then how does that look? I'm sorry. How does that look, Pete, to normal people? We did that in Colombia with a pharmaceutical distribution company, and they put them on the OFAC list for ties to the Medellin cartel. Next, and other department stores too that were really associated. So the next business day, hi, I'm sorry, cash only. No more credit cards accepted at this department store at this bank. Why? Because it's got to go through the swipe system and the electronic exchange system.
Yeah.
How they get you.
Well, and this gets back to the economics and the impact of all these things of like the U.S. saying we are going to go do this stuff in Iran. We'll figure out Diego Garcia later on. But in the meantime, we're going to put a pain point here on you, UK, the PM, and we're going to do it here. We'll do it again. And all of a sudden, they have to decide if they can take that bruisey spot getting poked all the time, especially if it's the CEO of Lloyd's. Because I promise, there was a phone call. I promise that happens. Yeah. And so,
it happens here too. It used to be the U.S. Chamber. When I was in government, we were doing all these free trade agreements. It wasn't on the document, but there was an approval process by which the U.S. Chamber's executive committee blessed what we were doing. We don't have that longer, right? In this current administration. And so, again, going back to the very beginning of our conversation today, it was all about expectations. You can run whatever business in the Old West cowboy town as long as you know all the players and what they're going to do and how they're going to respond. But if you don't, or if it's chaotic, or there's a new sheriff in town, you're not quite sure what's going to happen for a while. And it may be better later, but it's going to be really hard and chaotic and difficult right now.
Yeah. When Witkoff and Kushner go and they're negotiating, is there an economist with those guys helping them think through that stuff?
Probably not.
Probably not.
They'll that sort of thing, and every president does it. And it's always surprising who those people end up being. It's they would consume our reports. That's probably the best we could do. And if our reports were playing ball or whatever the case might be, or, and this happens sometimes in these governments, our governments, the political people they would rely on might be giving advice that doesn't seem that good or runs counter to their sort of like understanding how things work. They would ask us, the bureaucrats, to contribute more significantly to the thing. They would consume our product, but whether or not they did anything with it, who knows?
It's just a slight tangent, but you said the word bureaucrat, so I always like to discuss this. When we talk about bureaucrat, we have a connotation of being like, oh boy, bureaucrat. And there's a reason for that. It's well earned. But really, if you break the word down to its roots, it just means the power of the office, right? And so there is a requirement to like, hey, you're welcome to do whatever you're going to do, but this is what we think is going to happen. And from that comes this power that you have to deal with. And some of it slows you down. Lawyers always say you can't do that. And you say, well, tell me how. And then they, whatever. But there's a whole negotiation. But there is a power there in that office and the ability to have the right kind of understanding. And we want that expertise. We want that counsel. Even if we go against it, at least we know like, hey, this office says this is going to be bad, but this office says it's going to be good. And these two offices disagree. But there's a negotiation. And so that power has to be. So when we talk about the swamp, but you need a swamp so that you can run a government. Otherwise, oh my God, could you imagine? You just got rid of all these things and nobody knew what the if-thens were. It would be crazy.
There was another memo which was not amongst my favorite, but I found to be necessary from time to time, and it was the split decision memo, right? So we had several parts of our ecosystem that could not reach agreement. we would go up the chain and say, okay, here's the deal, and all the people that would disagree would agree that that was the deal. That's the topic.
Yeah.
Option one, it's almost like a Supreme Court opinion. Bureau this and this agrees on this. Option two, these guys agree on this. We can't agree. And so then the upper management would like generally put a big X through the one he disagreed with and circle the one that was okay. And then theoretically off we would all go. So that was nice. Now imagine with what you just said in the context of no longer having a USAID.
Yeah.
Now, Venezuela, if Maduro would have been gone on the helicopters back in the old days, sure shooting a little C-47 would be landing like almost immediately afterwards with all the USAID people. And they had money. We can talk about that some other time too. They had the program, which was money and stuff all ready to go, and they would like parachute into these places and do their thing and start getting those tendrils into everything else, and then all the memos and all the split memos, blah 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 blah. So Iran too. I mean, the fact that we don't have USAID currently fundamentally changes how we're interacting with all these regime change situations in a way that we haven't seen since just after World War II.
Yeah. And when you do this much change, you can have the big pieces work. It doesn't mean the whole thing at the small level works, right? And so as the banking system fractures or whatever it's going to be, and it goes independent, because we don't have USAID doing what they do to create these bonds and coalesce things in our favor. I mean, we got an outcome we had planned for in Iraq, hey, democracy, but we didn't get the influence that we wanted, and that went over to Iran, right? And now, like that
garbage trucks, Pete. I mean, look at those really nice new shows. We sent them millions and millions of dollars. We transported on military transports garbage trucks and dropped them off at the regional wherever. And could you imagine the New York Mafia seeing over there some other waste management people getting shiny shiny garbage trucks?
Yeah.
You'd be like, and then you'd start firebombing them and killing that's what happened.
It is exactly what happened. Yeah. And by the way, nobody there wants to be the trash man.
No.
And so
but that's also true. Where'd those other guys go that used to be the trash man?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it was looked down upon to be a trash man. It wasn't in any way. It certainly wasn't someone you tipped. Like they're doing a lot of our nation. Yeah, and so these plans get sideways fast. I know you see the news all the time, and we've been talking for almost an hour. Is there anything else that's interesting to you from an economics point of view? We kind of talked about the big structure, the small structure, the way money flows. Is there anything else out there?
I mean, this is such an amazing time to be alive. I think to be alive and paying attention to this stuff. It's transformational, and I don't mean that I don't know if it's good or bad. I don't know yet. It's unclear. But it's certainly the status quo was shitty. So, and then we're talking in Iran and Venezuela. So, throw all the pieces in a bag and draw new ones, and you're going to have a better outcome than you had before. I think anybody that can predict with any degree of certainty that they say about what our international economic system is going to look like in 2 years' time doesn't know what they're talking about right now, or thinks it's going to go back to the way it was, which it will not do. What's happening in Iran and Venezuela, in my opinion, they're those keystones. You take the keystone out and the arch weakens and could fall. We've taken out some major keystones, and you'll see Cuba. You're going to see China have problems. You're going to see Russia and Ukraine. I don't know if it's going to get resolved in a way that we imagine, but there's going to be pressure that we can't see because of the collapse of the shadow system that's going to make those conflicts emerge into something that currently is not before our eyes. So I would say watch for the cracks if we're watching a movie, the screen's going to start having cracks in it, and the film's going to start being off kilter, and we're not going to know if it's a fire in the projector room or an earthquake outside. We won't know, but something's going to change pretty quickly. And by quickly,
this administration, again, good and bad TBD, right? But we're seeing a lot of these secretaries in a way that I've never seen in my lifetime, and I've paid a good amount of attention. I know who the Secretary of Energy is and what his plan is and what his background is. Oh my God, I certainly know who the Secretary of Treasury and Secretary of Commerce are, and those guys, charming and goddamn, I as much as I don't like Donald Trump, I want to see these guys succeed, and they're pretty fucking qualified. So, what are your thoughts in general on the secretaries at all, or in particular any of the economic focused secretaries?
Yes, I am shocked, surprised by how closely they, in the public eye, seem to cleave to the president's vision. In Trump 1.0, that was really the case. You would not, you would see daylight, or you would assume daylight, and there certainly
Right.
was daylight in the bureaucratic things. The current crop seems tight,
Hmm.
and true believers in what's going on. And I don't know. I'm surprised the difference between the two versions are quite surprising. It's shocking. I don't know, and it makes me wonder if, because the whole question, and we've talked about this a bit before, is what comes after Trump. And we're going to start knowing very quickly after the midterms what comes after Trump, because you're going to see even on the Republican side, the contenders line up to be the next nominee. And the question is, are we looking at a 1988 scenario where you had Reagan, the force that he was, although diminishing at the end because of Iran-Contra and maybe some health stuff, but the country say, well, you know what, that was actually a pretty good deal. We want, at least more of that sort of thing. And so here we get, Bush Padre, and that didn't work out for a number of reasons. We can talk about another shows about whether or not the New World Order was properly executed or whatever. So are we looking at an 88 situation where people are going to say, wow, this past 4 years of Trump that actually worked out pretty well for everybody. Let's continue. Or are you going to see folks like Vance? So when you have an 88 situation or a 92 situation or whatever came after Clinton, and you tire of it, we didn't get Gore after Clinton. Why? Because
Right.
people got tired of a certain number of things. You need to position yourself enough as a change candidate so the people, but not too much, so that the people that want change can vote for you, but the people that want to continue things can vote for that. So I think we need to look and see what happens with the future of the Republican Party. It could be that Trumpism continues. I doubt it. I think it's uniquely situated in just the president. Inability to I don't know. I haven't seen anybody that is able to do it yet, but I'm curious to see what happens. And maybe the people are tired of it. I don't know.
Yeah, and if we knew anything else about a crowded secondary field of presidential candidates, someone's going to get knifed, and then it's
Yeah, I
going to be
wonder how
ugly. The infighting.
gonna be. I mean, the Democrats have their own issue, and it's going to be fascinating.
Oh, sure, yeah,
Fascinating.
for sure.
But the Republican one, I don't think we've seen anything like this since Reagan and Ford were going to duke it out in a brokered convention in '76. Right.
Yeah, you're right.
If you go
You're
back
right.
and
Yeah,
study the history of that was fascinating. That happened in the smoky back room.
yeah.
And it was Reagan saying, "All right, I'll wait," and Ford, and then we saw what happened there. That got us Carter.
And and again, we're way far ahead. And you just said if you think you know what's going to happen in 2 years, you don't know shit. So let me throw a little thing out there in the face of that. But whoever is the president next, if it's going to be someone from this administration, we'll just say Marco Rubio, because that seems like a fairly fair guess. I would have, if I was him, I would have Donald Trump ready to deploy on an airplane anytime and kind of do the Clinton thing, but on steroids, and just say, go get me a deal over here, go get me a deal over there. And I don't know if President Trump will have the capacity to do that. I don't know if anybody wants him around, but I mean, that model, while he was busy doing it, really repaired Clinton's reputation. If he went somewhere, he was going to walk back with a deal that was going to be good,
Yeah, we had don't forget what we had with the Clinton situation was a tremendous. We had the Clinton Global Foundation, and
Yes.
And we can. I like how you did. I actually liked President Clinton. I met him a few times. I didn't master, but of course there were issues, and one of the issues, in my opinion, was the Global Foundation, and that's really unfortunate. He could have been a much better former president. Like, you want to talk about former presidents doing well? Jimmy Carter did great, right? The Habitat for Humanity
Yep.
and just generally doing
Yep.
all the election monitoring stuff. He did grand. I think he's a supermodel. I think Clinton was a little busy making money for Clinton, and then you had Hillary doing what Hillary wanted to do next. So that's a bit there. I think the goal of the people that are against Trump right now are to tar him somehow with some sort of brush that makes him unable, and Trumpism unable, to continue going forward. The U.S. Chamber, everybody that loved the status quo before, all those people would love that dearly. Just, they tried it the first time, right? I mean, after he left office, and the whole January 6th, and I hate that topic, and it made me sad. It was a tragedy. fell right into it. Anyway, they all the prosecutions, all this other stuff, and I'm not saying he didn't deserve any of it, but it happened, and they tried to keep the dude out of politics, and that didn't work. And now look, he's back, and look what happened. So they're going to keep trying to do that, and I think at the end of the fourth year of Trump, people are going to be tired of the leftists. I don't want to say Democrats because it's not all of them, but the really vibrant leftists here are going to have been shrieking for so long, howling in pain for so long, and they're not making it up. They are in pain. I feel it. I get it. Okay. People are going to be tired of it, and more things are going to happen to make the loud howls even more reverberating. People are going to say, you know what, we can't have this is just my opinion, way out there. We can't have our country suffering through more of this. We need something that brings us all together, blah, blah, blah. And so the next president, whoever that is going to have to either be one of those people that can bring us all together, or get enough of the people that were howling to vote for him to say we need to make those people howl as loud as we were. Ouch.
Yeah, and I mean, you're making a lot of sense. I have far too many friends that feel unsafe on the streets because they believe the government's going to come get them, and then dead people show up because the government went and got them. Right, and so you can't say you don't get to feel that way. Of course, like it's like, there's a lot of change going on, and change makes people howl and be afraid. And you look at someone like Donald Trump who acts the way he does, and it's like, yeah, I don't trust that guy. And that's one of my main problems with him is his leadership style is such that he will purposefully divide us and then go deliver a win or something. I'll take all the wins he's got, but he'll announce, I'm going to shoot myself in the foot. Ow, I shot myself in the foot. You're like, that's a purposeful error.
Yeah.
Like you did these things. And
our country is sick. Half of the people are ill with this malady, and I'm not saying they're weak because of it. They're sick. I mean, the howling hurts. And this thing with Iran, it is such a good thing potentially to change the mullahs. I mean, and another show we can do is the long-term effects of Islam coexisting with the Western society. The variety of Islam that doesn't toss gays off buildings and lets women drive, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
That has a chance if you get rid of these really terrible seats. But nobody on the left can say that because they're so ill with hating the president. So we need to cure ourselves of that. And it's going to happen. It has to happen. Or we're going to be really a weak country. So I think the next president, whoever it is going to allow at least a large chunk of that people to feel cured. And so as we look to see on the Republican side who it's going to be, I don't know. It's not going to be the Howard Lutnicks or the people that are out there forcefully charging ahead, making Trumpism work. It's going to be someone that was more reserved and say, well, credibly so, yeah, I hear where you're saying about how that wasn't the best thing to do. I wouldn't do it that way. You can't do that now because Trump will get pissed off. But eventually you're going to see the people do it. And I guess to go back to answer your question, if it's going to be from the economic side of things, I don't know that can be, because the folks on the economic side of things have been so zestfully advancing Trumpism in a way that can't be walked back to the people that are howling, including big businesses and stuff. I don't think it's going to come from that side. I am very intrigued by the Rubios and the Vances of the world, and watching how they keep in reserve the ability to go against Trumpism post-Trump without pissing the president off currently.
Yeah, it's interesting because you definitely can draw his attention in a bad way, and that can, again, he's impetuous, and so because of that, his impulse-driven way of doing things is wonderful when you want help. And I've known people that have sat across the table from him, and other people that have been in the room, and he's looked at his people and said, "Fix this." That guy I want, but the other side, I don't want. When he causes chaos for the sake of causing chaos. And
look at what we had the prior 4 years. I mean, obviously Biden had stuff going on, and probably rarely challenged folks, like rarely challenged the bureaucracy to do these big things.
Yeah.
And so you didn't have the mistakes as much. You had different issues. I'm not saying you're right. The chaos causes problems, but sometimes the benefits to handling these problems head on is spectacular. But again, absent one heroic helicopter pilot, unknown what's going to happen here. if these bets pan out, that's great. Could you imagine if either of these two huge deals went
Yeah.
south in a
Yeah.
tremendously tragic way? And
Yeah.
Iran yet to know, but holy cow, we'd be having a different conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And if you told me, and a lot of people are saying this kind of thing, 18 months ago that Havana and Cuba will be wobbling and probably come in our direction if Venezuela had every opportunity to do what Venezuela has been great at doing without all the distraction of the nefarious players. If you had Iran in serious trouble and Israel's already wiped out most of the human threat around them. If you told me that the market was going to be above 50K, and if you told me that my IRA account would be growing at 10 plus points, um, and we had better control over the Panama Canal, that Israel and Hamas weren't fighting directly anymore today, I'd take all those wins.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, who else? I think it's no coincidence that all this big stuff happened before the midterms, because if the midterms change the power structure, then I think you have a whole different situation where you wouldn't be able to do these things. So I think two things. One is got to do it before the midterms. It's being done. But two, what comes after Iran? I mean, if you look at a world map and you go, wow, I really need someone to go. North Korea is problematic and all that, but it doesn't need to go. It's whatever it is. I mean, after Iran, there's no real candidate for like needing to goism.
Yeah, and maybe that part, and they definitely have a plan. They've phased things in. They've approached this in a way that they think is smart and thought out, but they also don't seem to want to slow down. They're always doing stuff, and maybe it'll be some domestic stuff. Donald Trump can use some domestic wins, and because foreign policy, well, it's tough to run on foreign policy. But if people got jobs and they have money, I mean, you think about pre-pandemic, Donald Trump was going to get reelected, and then the pandemic came along and changed everything. So, yeah.
In a way,
Yeah.
I'm glad. I mean, I wouldn't have enjoyed as much a second Trump administration right after the first one. The first one was really chaotic, and the bureaucracy was fighting itself. I'm
Yeah.
surprised it's happening now, and I agree with you. I dislike the chaos, and I dislike the hurting people or institutions for the very sake of doing it. But it is highly effective. Another issue to look at is what's going to happen with the tariff thing. We can do another show about that. The refund of the illegal tariffs is a big problem, huge problem, and they're going to tie it up a bit in court. But unless Congress says, "Oh yeah, that's okay, you can keep it," it's going to have to be refunded, and that's going to be a problem. That's going to cause some chaos.
Yeah. Who's the economist in charge of that money sitting there, and they're arbitraging that to things to make money? That's a lot of money sitting there.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you can just hold it and not have to pay it back for 5 years, I think it'll be okay. But someone got a note in their performance file about choosing IEPA because well, we can talk about this later too. Maybe it's a good thing. I mean, if you look at the 84 Chevron decision that was thrown out against the EPA just in 2024, it's probably a good thing that the president doesn't make up huge executive powers for himself that he never had, according to our Constitution. I mean, that's good, but it's causing a lot of chaos. I don't know.
It is causing a lot of chaos. There's a lot of change happening, and some of it's going to be good, some of it's going to be bad, and we'll continue to complain about it and do shows about it.
But we're all Americans, and so we can do that, and that's wonderful. If we were living under the thumb of a king, we wouldn't be doing this, Pete. Or if we were, we'd be immediately ourselves to our remote locations and hunkering down for a while.
I mean, we talk about a surveillance state, and we saw that in Iran, when women and all the things that happened. A guy that I had on the show, Michael White, he was arrested and in Iran. He's an American, and he was tortured. He filed an appeal, and when he got done with his appeal, he charged him with more crimes. That's not how appeals work. He's supposed to be working on it. And they're like, yeah, and you made us mad again. And so he was beaten and tortured. He's the guy I told you about who got a finding through the international court system where he sued Iran for like $1 billion or whatever it was. And because they had abducted him and tortured him and held him illegally, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then they didn't show up to court. The judgment went in accordance with the norms of those kinds of things. And so he was worth something like $350 million. I'll say something like that. Maybe it was 100 million. It was a lot of money. And then you have to collect it. Amazingly, we have a system for this, everybody. And so, and this is how this works is if Iran lands a plane, like we'll say their version of Air Force One in the airport, and the airport is like, yeah, we'll seize that thing. They seize it. And then Iran's like, hey, we want our airplane back. You don't get it back. And then it goes and it gets sold at some auction somewhere down in Alameda County or whatever it is. Some guy buys a 757 for, and that money goes into this pot. By the way, that pot is a worldwide pot for all of these court cases that awards are found. And then it's parceled out to these people. And it's an amazing thing to think about. First off, tasking someone to go lock up a 757 and enforcing that. There's the guy who's like you, who's, oh my God. It's an amazing thing.
One of the issues with Venezuela, just really quickly, is we saw the chink in the armor. It was unexpected, and if you knew how to look for it in that meeting with the oil execs, Venezuela is deep into judgments to Chevron and the other oil execs for all the expropriations they did. That government owes U.S. oil company a lot of money, and so all of a sudden we're like, oh yeah, we're going to start up the spigots again and do all this, and the oil company is like, okay, yeah, but all that money goes to us. Well, we couldn't have that because we needed it to go to Venezuela to keep paying the police and all those other people that weren't murdering civilians currently. That's a problem, and so you had to split the baby. And I'm not sure, but I imagine that's part of what that big gold transaction is for, is to give a slice to keep those folks from chirping.
Because at least here in the U.S., and again, thank goodness we live in the U.S. where this stuff is possible, those oil companies have rights, and they can say, we have documents that say that we're owed this money, and they are, and they will get paid that money. And if you don't, now you owe twice as much. That's like, if you want to lose a case, that's who you go after, is the guy that's already won the case, and don't pay him. And so, I mean, you're right. Like that's a real thing. Like that's their property. In other places, that doesn't work as good. So like you can go to Ukraine and say, hey, I've got this finding. And then they're like, well, enforce it.
Yeah.
I can't. All right, man. Anything else before we wrap this up? And thanks. I love this chat. It was super helpful for me to understand the economics of these things. It's always fascinating talking to you.
Thank you very much. Love watching your shows. You're doing good work out there.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. We'll see you all later. Bye-bye, everybody.